What is up, college football fans and fellow members of Mountaineer Nation? This is Couz, and this is another edition of Couz's Corner, your go-to channel for college sports with a heavy dose of West Virginia Mountaineers. A lot of you are not happy with the new makeup of the Big 12 Conference. You don't think it's going to be a quality product. You think we're going to be behind the other Power 5 conferences. And you may be right. Especially, financially at first, they might be behind the other conferences. But I think as far as product on the field, they're going to be as equal to, if not better, than the Pac-12 and the ACC. And I've brought along a guest, Mr. John Kurtz, to help me make that argument. Most of you may already know John, but if not, check him out on YouTube. I'm going to put a link in the description box. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so as well. And smash the like button on this video. And once you've had a chance to listen to this interview, let me know if John and I have been able to change your mind and convince you. If you were one of these that think the new Big 12 is not a quality conference, let us know in the comments if we're able to change your mind or not once you've had a chance to listen to this interview, okay? Give it a chance. Listen to what we have to say. Without further ado, here's Mr. John Kurtz. Hi, John, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. I appreciate you having me on, man. Looking forward to it.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you taking time out of your schedule. I know you're a busy man. Real quick, before we get started, will you give my viewers a little bit of your background for the few who may not? Most of them probably know who you are, but for the few who may not, will you please share?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, obviously, like a lot of people probably do know the YouTube channel, which is where, I've been trying to cover conference realignment and everything that's going on there. And just generally the Big 12. I mean, I've grown up a Big 12 fan and have covered the league now for about 10 years. So I'm in Manhattan, Kansas. I work at a radio station here in town. I host a daily radio show. I work with K-State and do some play-by-play and pregame radio for football and basketball. So I've been doing that. Yes, it's 2011. And then obviously throughout all that, I've had the opportunity to go everywhere in the Big 12, cover everywhere in the league, and, grew up a diehard fan of the league and just have a real passion for it. So keeps me busy, and it's been really cool to see the response with the YouTube channel and everything that's happened in what's otherwise been a pretty difficult time for all of us Big 12 fans. So that's kind of the long and short of where I'm at and how I got there.
Awesome. Appreciate that quick background. There's a few West Virginia fans. I know you've been the voice of the Big 12 through all this conference chaos, realignment and expansion and everything. But there's still a lot of fans out there that seem to think that the Big 12 is not in a good place and not going to be stable, and that we're going backwards and just really not bought in, I guess you could say, to the four new teams that are coming in. And I think I differ with that. And I know you do because I've watched your show. And obviously they're not Texas and Oklahoma. I'm not here to try to debate that. But I do think they are going to be as good, if not better, than some of the other Power 5 conferences, namely the Pac-12, number one, and the ACC. And I know you've talked about that a little bit on your show. And can you just give my viewers a little bit of some of the information you have on that?
Yeah, so it's funny how all of that has turned out. Like I never envisioned going into this that like the Pac-12 would wind up being public enemy number one, but that kind of is how it's happened. And it's not really even any fault of the Pac-12's own. It's a lot of the national media and the way that they've treated it. I mean, to be honest, you just got the general vibe throughout all of this that nobody was taking the Big 12 very seriously. Nobody was having much empathy or care for the fan bases of schools like West Virginia, like Kansas State, like Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, that have awesome fan bases, big stadiums, great facilities, all of these things that should keep them with a seat at the major college football table. And so there was already this, I think, a resentment from that. And then you started getting negative story after negative story about the Big 12 and TV ratings of, the remaining 8 teams versus the AAC. And then you had the storyline for a while. Well, the AAC is actually maybe going to raid the Big 12 because the conferences aren't that much different. And these narratives started getting out of hand. And the one that really set me off was when Stuart Mandel from The Athletic really laughed and scoffed at the notion that somebody actually from the SEC network of all places had suggested that the Big 12 with those 4 new teams might be a better football product on the field than what the Pac-12 is. And, I don't even know that I would definitively say 100% the new Big 12 will be better every single season than the Pac-12, but it certainly will be competitive, and it's going to be on the same level, and it will be very, very similar. And just to laugh it off as if that is not even a discussion, I think is so silly. And the reasoning when Mandel was pushed on it was, well, okay, let's look at the recruiting rankings. And all right, I mean, if you want to just go strictly by recruiting rankings, why has Texas not won the Big 12 every single year that they've been in the league, right? You know, I mean,
right.
We know that it comes down to how you actually perform out on the field. And so when there was that pushback delivered, he said, all right, fine, then NFL draft picks. Well, if you want to do NFL draft picks, the new version of the Big 12, take out Texas and Oklahoma, put in the 4 teams that are going to be added to the league. You got 29 combined draft picks last year versus 28 for the Pac-12. Which again, like comes back to it's not just recruiting, it's how you're developing players and all of that. And the SEC has this dominance because everybody says, well, they have so many guys in the NFL. Well, the Big 12 is outdueling them there. If you look at the numbers this year so far, the Massey computer numbers, which is the aggregate, basically computer numbers, like what you used to see in the BCS, they tell you right now that the Pac-12 is actually closer to the Mountain West than the current Big 12. And it's not quite that bad when you take in the new Big 12 versus the Pac-12, but it is still a wide margin. I mean, substantially, the Big 12 is out in front of the Pac-12 and the ACC for that matter. So, you know, the ratings of what you see right now on the field would favor the Big 12. The draft pick thing is almost dead even, in fact, tipping the scale slightly to the Big 12 for this past year. The one thing that the Pac-12 may have is the financial edge, but even that, right, I think is the most compelling part of all of this, because right now the Big 12's payout has been about $40 million per team with TV revenue, NCAA tournament, everything matched together. And the Pac-12 was at about 32. So they were about 8 million behind. You know, we'll see. The industry experts have been saying maybe 20 to 25 for this new Big 12. I think the Big 12 leaders are hopeful it's even a little bit more than that. And the Pac-12 has a new TV contract coming up in the next year and a half. And I don't see where they're going to get a massively better deal than the one that they have right now. So I think the finances may actually wind up being pretty similar too at the end of the day. And even then, I just would say wait and see what happens when UCF gets more money, because they will either way, they'll be making substantially more money in the Big 12. Mm-hmm. Wait and see what happens when BYU starts making more money, Cincinnati, and how they can adjust and grow and cultivate their program with better resources, a little bit more clout, and potentially some playoff appearances when we get to an expanded playoff. I think the potential exists there to develop some better brands and teams that actually can win. If you can start winning some playoff games, you will develop some of these brands and powers that people are talking about. May not have the legs that a USC or an Oregon or Ohio State do long-term, but it can still happen. And so I think that's the general idea to me, and why it's just been so frustrating to see all of this from Pac-12 country. And I think it's just ridiculous. I think what we're headed towards in college football, and this is probably even just a bigger can of worms, but we're headed toward the SEC and the Big Ten and everybody else. And, you know, that still is a bummer, and that does suck on a level, you know, for Big 12 fans, but the ACC and the Pac-12 are going to be right there with you.
Right. Yep. I agree with everything you said there. And I found some stats after listening to your show. I went and did some digging on my own and found some interesting stats. When you look at the bowl games, you know, the new Big 12 schools taking out Texas and Oklahoma, like you were talking about. The new Big 12 actually has a better record in bowl games over the last 5 years, and the out of conference matchups, they're better record in that. So I mean, I don't understand how anyone can look if you dig into the numbers, the data, it's there. They're the proof's in the pudding, as they say. Yeah. So I agree 100% with you. The last 5 years, the Pac-12 or the Big 12 versus the Pac-12, new Big 12 versus Pac-12 is 15-15, 500 record, right? And of those, 5 of those were BYU's losses to Utah. You know, they had that 8-game losing streak there to Utah. They obviously broke that this year. And that ain't even counting this year's games. I think this year, if you take the 4 new schools plus the current Big 12, it would be, I think they're 4-0 this year against the Pac-12, if I'm not mistaken. So that now goes up to 19-15 record in the last 6 years. So, and then you look at the bowl game record, 24-24 of the last 5 years is the Big 12. You got Pac-12 is 16-24. Now that's more games, obviously, but look at the winning percentage there. Much better. Big 12's 500 in bowl games over the last 5 years. So, I mean, the on-field performance is there. And even when you look at the ACC, 11-6 against ACC the last 5 years out of conference games. So, and they're 24-24 in bowl games. Like I said earlier, the ACC is 27-33 in the last 5 years in bowl games. So, I just don't understand the narrative. I don't know where the narrative comes from. I mean, if you want to take they can take one little nugget of information and use it against the Big 12. but they're not looking at the whole picture, in my opinion.
No, I agree. I totally agree. I think it's been everybody already had preconceived notions about the league. It's been a punching bag for a long time, going back to the last round of realignment. And I think that's really where a lot of it comes from. I mean, there was such a preconceived notion about the Big 12 being just full of a bunch of dysfunction that everybody always thought, well, I mean, it can't be that great of a league because nobody is really together. And look, there have been some foundational problems, and a lot of that dates back, frankly, to Texas and the league dynamics when it started back in 1996, which is why you saw Nebraska leave. And a lot of things clearly have happened to, weaken some of the foundation of the league, but that doesn't take away from the fact that there are still a lot of very good football programs and, I was about to say brands, I suppose, if we're talking on a national level, maybe not as many, but that's really the problem. And I think really what you see is just systemically a lot of problems that are happening in college football are being kind of projected onto the Big 12. Whereas what we really have is we have 10 to 15 brands that matter in college football, maybe even less. I mean, really probably more like 5 to 10
right
at this point. And it's getting more concentrated based on recruiting. The top talent is becoming more concentrated, less spread out in terms of where everybody is going. So it's shrinking. You have 5 to 10 schools that really matter every year, and then everybody else is in the exact same boat. And you've just had the Big 12 schools really singled out because they happen to be the ones getting separated now from their two big brands in Texas and Oklahoma. And so that's the real frustrating part about it, because you're right. I mean, bringing up the ACC, look at the ACC right now, like Wake Forest and Boston College are the two unbeaten teams atop the ACC standings right now. And no offense to those two schools, but that's not what you want. And that's not the sign of a real strong, powerful conference. So you're seeing like when Clemson all of a sudden becomes human and they're not one of those 4 or 5 teams every single year that's above everybody else, head and shoulders above, just how average that league looks. And frankly, a lot of the computer numbers have told you over the last 3, 5 to 10 years that the ACC has been even behind the Pac-12 because they just have so much dead weight. They have more teams and they have more dead weight pulling them down at the bottom, with just the one brand in Clemson holding them up since Florida State went in the tank. I mean, that's been a huge thing. It's really hurt the ACC obviously as well. And so some of this is like, look, if Florida State ever figures it out, which doesn't look great right now, but if Florida State ever figures it out, if USC ever figures it out, which again doesn't look great, they just got pummeled by Oregon State yesterday. Those schools can make a big difference, but right now, they're pretty much in the same type of boat as the Big 12. So yeah, that's all this fight's been about. It's just been about like, let's just be fair and try and be equal to everybody here and realize the bigger picture of what is going on. I'm not saying the Big 12 doesn't have problems, and I'm not saying that it is the league is clearly taking a bit of a step back, no doubt, with the 2 out and the 4 in, but it's not what a lot of people would lead you to believe. It is not as substantial as a lot of people would lead you to believe.
I agree. And as a, West Virginia and Kansas State, our 2 teams, I'm excited about these 4 teams coming in, but at the same time, as a fan, I'm nervous because I'm thinking, well, how good UCF going to be when they start getting Big 12 money, right? How good is Cincinnati going to be? Because they're already really good football teams.
Yeah.
Houston is big with that big market and that recruiting base that they have there. How good can they be when they start getting Big 12 money? So and BYU's already good. I mean, they're undefeated. Well, they're 4-0 with 3 wins against Power 5 teams. So, I mean, I think these teams will come in from day one competing and potentially contenders for conference titles now. So how good can they be 5 years down the road once they start getting the bigger paydays? It's scary as a fan for a specific team, but exciting for the conference. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think that will be absolutely fascinating to see how the first 5 years, let's say, of this league, assuming that you get this league and what we expect it to be right now, how will that shake out? Who will win the most league titles? I mean, I've asked that question, to my Twitter followers with a poll, and it's like the answers are all over the place. I don't really know what to expect. Like I'm inclined to lean like you toward BYU, UCF, and Cincinnati being perhaps the strongest contenders there.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll just have, I think, a lot of parity because so many of these programs feel very similar. And UCF is the one to me that just really, I think, could take off like a rocket if we're talking about giving them 5 to 10 years with more resources and being at the Big 12 level, because they're such a young program. They only started playing football. Well, they only became a university in like 1968. It was 68 or 69. They first started playing FBS football at that level in 1996.
Wow.
So, I mean, that is a young pro. You're talking about old school Big Eight schools here that have been playing each other since the 1800s, and they've been an FBS school since 1996. They're in Florida, in a market without an NFL team now. I mean, there's tons of talent, obviously, in that state. There's going to be more reason for guys like that to stay home as opposed to leave. I mean, if they can scoop up second and third tier Florida kids, there's just a lot there. And there's a commitment at that university that has really impressed me to be good and to continue pushing themselves forward. They also have I think what's been a relatively young alumni base that's now getting older. I mean, they have a 70,000 enrollment. It's crazy. It's a huge school.
I saw that.
And some of that is being a commuter type of school, but the dynamics of that are changing, and they're having alums now get to the point where they have more expendable income and are becoming more invested in football. And so I just think you could see a lot of that really take off and take shape here over the next 5 to 10 years. So I'm with you. I think there's enormous potential. And I think, yeah, if you're a West Virginia fan, a K-State fan, you might be saying like, ooh, man, I mean, they have some more, just natural built-in advantages than you do, but that's also, that's a risk you have to take, for the sake of the conference. And I wish more people would look at that and think of it like that, because it doesn't really seem, it seems like you hear more on the other side of like, okay, well, what happens when they play a Big 12 schedule and how much of an adjustment period will there be? And I'm sure there's some of that too, but at the same time, man, I think the benefits outweigh what any adjustment period would be for those schools over the long haul.
I agree with you 100%. Absolutely. Well, John, look, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I really appreciate you coming on, and it's been great to talk with you. I really enjoy your YouTube channel. I appreciate you being the voice for the Big 12 and kind of taking up that mantle when nobody else would besides you, and there's maybe one or two others out there, but in my opinion, you've been the loudest voice and the most consistent voice. So I appreciate that. I ask all my viewers, if you're not subscribed to John's channel, please do so. Go check him out. He talks Big 12 football every day on his channel. He's on Twitter, TikTok, any other platforms, John, that I'm leaving out?
Yeah, Instagram. I got to get better at it, but I am technically on Instagram too. So
okay,
yeah.
All right, good deal. Yeah, if you haven't, guys, most of you have probably already checked John out, but if you haven't, please do so. And I really appreciate it again, John. And you take care.
Hey, absolutely, anytime. Really appreciate it, and great to talk to all your followers. And keep watching some Big 12 football and enjoy the rest of the season, man.
Let's do it. Thanks. Have a good night.
You too.
Well, Couz's Corner fam, I hope you appreciated my conversation with John. I think he brings a lot of great insight and great points to the conversation. Listen, please go check John out. And while you're at it, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so. I would really appreciate it. Let me know in the comments what you thought about the conversation with John and what you think about the Big 12 conference going forward. Once again, if you like this interview and this episode, please smash that like button. And until next episode, peace out.